This episode of the Seventh Valkyrie podcast was brought to you by me, Midnight Dog Greatjaw Air Theme. If you'd like to get the full experience, including all available seasons, extra artwork, bonus features, and behind-the-scenes content, you can download the Seventh Valkyrie app at the link in the description. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Seventh Valkyrie podcast. I'm your host, Colin Sharp, creator of the Seventh Valkyrie. Thank you to our introduction on that one again, as always. And today, if you've noticed the title, I wanted to talk about how something that I call collaborative combat drama is my absolute favorite thing on the planet. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about by now, it's pro wrestling, as in WWE, AEW, more recently is my favorite, New Japan Pro Wrestling. Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, John Cena. Just a few stars from an industry that has brought me much joy since the moment I was growing up, even to the present day. It's a ridiculously silly industry when you really think too hard about it. I remember going back to, high school or even high school, like middle school, where there was always that kid who was like, do you know it's not real? And it's like, yes, okay, we know it's not real. Anyway, that's a whole conversation it's like, but Seventh Valkyrie isn't real, and people listen to that. Was always my, Game of Thrones isn't real. He would always be like, well, but it's scripted, they know the finish. I was like, you don't, like. And they're like, well, but it's not fun to watch. I was like, well, do you watch Game of Thrones just because you know it's scripted? There aren't really White Walkers. Like, I have to tell you that. Anyway, sorry, I had to pop in with my preemptive defense of my silly favorite activity, which is funny because I'm on a podcast for my fantasy series that's more outlandish. And anyway, I'm getting distracted. I often get distracted while talking about pro wrestling. It's just such a wealth. It's such a huge thing in my life. Not quite like the biggest thing I'm a fan of. Like, I'd call a few sports teams, food, alcohol, and then maybe we get to pro wrestling. Although pro wrestling is recently, I could probably give up alcohol before I'd give up pro wrestling, so we'll bump those up. Anyway. And it's actually kind of funny that I'm recording this podcast now, the day after I listened to you guys are gonna get it a few weeks later, but I just finished watching Revolution, AEW Revolution 2023, which is one of their big pay-per-views, and man, did they know how to put on a good show. Their TV has been on and off, and like I'm a religious watcher, but I know people have had complaints about it, but you cannot have complaints about these shows that they put on. I mean, just hot crowds packed to the brim, people going absolutely wild for these performers, and that, like, to me, that's like all you need to have a thing be enjoyable. It doesn't even have to be that good, but if people are into it, it's awesome. And I think there's also another cornucopia of reasons why collaborative combat drama is freaking awesome. I think it pushes the limits of what humans can do in terms of athleticism. It shows us how you can tell compelling stories that don't have beginnings or ends. Pro wrestling promotions, like, it's not like they have seasons. They're just running year round, and so you're always building for the next fight. You're always building to the biggest story. And it's got a lot of good energy in that way. Like, I've found it fascinating as a writer to see, like, how do you tell a compelling story when you have to deal with injuries, hundreds of people that are like on your roster or related to your roster, a giant interconnected world. I mean, it's a massive undertaking, and it's like something that I admire a lot when they get it right, especially because I'm a big athlete, I'm a big nerd. Obviously, you can tell from the Seventh Valkyrie I like fighting stuff. So it just wraps up all my favorite things. But bringing it all the way back to Seventh Valkyrie, part of this podcast was I just wanted to gush about my favorite thing. But another thing was I was like, wow, it's amazing how much Seventh Valkyrie's actually been influenced by my love of pro wrestling. It's taught me that humans are capable of way more than you think, and that sometimes the things that people pull off in real life are more amazing than anything we could possibly write reasonably. I wrote that a little bit. I noted the same thing about Kawhi Leonard's Game 7 buzzer beater that bounced 4 times. Sometimes like people pull off stuff in real life that you're like, if you wrote it fictionally, they'd be like, come on, there's no way that would really happen. It tells you how to mesh dozens of stories together that, and make each one feel important. It taught me the value of a patient build of that, you can just throw your 2 best guys together and be like, it's a match. But you can also do all sorts of other things. That you can hold them apart. You can have them, slightly interact. You can tease it for years. There are stories that have been going on, like the Golden Lovers story with Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, the story of Tetsuya Naito's rise to the top. The whole Roman Reigns and Bloodline storyline they're going with in WWE right now. These are compelling long-term stories, and they teach you that if you're patient and if you build a story for long enough, you can really pay it off, and that the build and the twists and the turns each time pay off that final thing. It's just really fun. And I think the last thing that I really learned from pro wrestling was, and this is a big topic, but I can tell because I've got a ton of bullet points under this, are that telling a story around combat. I've heard wrestling described as redneck anime, and I think it's actually kind of super spot on because I love anime and I love pro wrestling. But there's this very popular version, subgenre of anime called, or I guess it's really a genre of anime, called a battle shonen, where it's like, you recognize that Dragon Ball Z is a battle shonen, Naruto is a battle shonen. They're like, I am going to get stronger and stronger and stronger and fight against bigger and bigger enemies. And when you look at the roots of Seventh Valkyrie, it's got its roots as a battle shonen. For lack of a better word, I was a huge dork for all those series from the moment I was, I could find them on TV. And I mean, I'm unabashed about the fact that for the very first probably 2.5 years of Seventh Valkyrie, it was just like a book-written battle shonen. Obviously, it's evolved over time, but I mean, it's just a good format where it's like the character starts out weak and they can't handle the world. You introduce them getting stronger, gaining new strength and abilities through their experiences. Eventually, they overcome harder and harder challenges until they beat the big bad. And then sometimes they're like, the studio will go, write more, and so they'll just come up with another bigger bad. And then in the case of Dragon Ball Z, you have a 25-year series where they just keep coming up with more and more outlandish enemies. Where by the time they got to the second series, people could already blow up planets, and then they just kind of went from there. But what pro wrestling has actually offered that kind of offers a balance to that battle shonen mentality, and I think it's really interesting, is that with pro wrestling, you can kind of have a character start weak and then grow up and build, but pro wrestling doesn't end. You can't just be all right, cool, you overcame the bad guy, great, you've got a show to film the next day. So it's all right, how do you wrap up a story and then turn it into another one in a compelling way? And how do you continue to ride these stories? And how do you keep characters hot and interesting? It's a fascinating storytelling challenge. And what it has most importantly taught me is a lot of details, about how you can actually make a story and a battle compelling without making it just about, who's stronger, or are you weaker, and then are you eventually going to overcome by unlocking some new power? It can be a story about valiantly trying and failing. It can be about redemption, and obviously it's not one-to-one, but there's a lot of really interesting ways that they make things compelling that make you think, okay, I don't have to just go, insurmountable obstacle, they did it, insurmountable obstacle, they did it. You can kind of find other ways to make a fight compelling. And so anyway, that's been an interesting aspect. And then, there's all these other things that we could go into, the larger than life characters, how you create things that are so strange, but so, like, if they're consistent to themselves and they're kind of weird in their own way, they can become incredibly popular. How keeping consistency is valued. And finally, it actually taught me a lot about what I like about combat and fight scenes. Fighting styles are always different. How do you turn, an interesting fight between two people, other than the story, how do you make the actual action interesting? And I think that what wrestlers do to create their own style and make sure that they're not all the same and that each one stands out, so you could, see an outline of them and you would know immediately what kind of person, what moves they were using if you're a fan. I mean, that's really amazing. And all of that comes into the Seventh Valkyrie. It's a hugely influential set of it's just been something that I've loved for my entire life. And I'm not saying I'm trying to make Seventh Valkyrie into a pro wrestling show, but I just, in the aftermath of watching Revolution 2 nights ago, I was just like, I want to geek out about this thing because it's amazing how influential it's been on me and how many sneaky good storytelling aspects you can find hidden within a match of two yoked dudes pretending to be superheroes. It's like CrossFitters LARPing, and it's the best thing in the world. So anyway, that's really all I had to say. Just that, kind of an interesting set of thoughts on how Seventh Valkyrie has been influenced by and learned from pro wrestling, which is, and this is my confession that I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. But yeah, so that's it. In the meantime, take care. Give pro wrestling a shot if you feel like it. If you don't, then don't. And I'll love you either way. Bye. I bow my head to the honor of you listening to the Seventh Valkyrie podcast, brought to you by me, Midnight Dog Greatjaw Era Theme. To get the full experience, including all available seasons, extra artwork, bonus features, and behind-the-scenes content, download the Seventh Valkyrie app at the link in the description. And may the stars watch over you.